You're watching the Law and Crime Network. Aaron Keller along with you this afternoon. We're sorry we had a bit of a hiccup there, but we've been reviewing previous testimony in a Cloud 9 second-degree murder and attempted second-degree murder trial out of Florida. Meanwhile, we have an extremely special guest in studio today. Don't adjust your monitors. She is here in person. Cathy Russon, Law News' own, is not joining us by Skype for the first time ever today.
Extremely special.
This is shocking. We're talking and I'm not looking at a monitor.
It's so exciting.
So we've got a lot of cases on tap. We've got Cloud 9 going into closing arguments tomorrow. We've got Xavie and Dobson, which is going into opening statements tomorrow. That's the case of a young teenager, football player, who died protecting friends in what police are saying is a mistaken identity retaliatory gang attack. Say that several times fast, please, now that you're here.
No, I'm good.
Not going to try to do it? Okay, and then we've got the Todd Kenhammer case where we're expecting opening statements anytime today, but apparently it's taking a little bit longer than we thought to seat the jury. What's going on in that case?
So we expected openings maybe an hour or two ago, and they're not getting the jury yet. It's interesting because this must be a small town in Wisconsin. You're spent some time there, so you probably know. La
Crosse is pretty small. It would be considered a smaller media market in television terms. It's not a very big place.
Right, because what they're running into right now is that several of these potential jurors know each other. So the defense is doing a lot of questioning about, will they just agree with each other in deliberations because they know each other? And so there's talk about that going on as they're selecting. And I can't remember ever seeing that being reported in a jury selection before, about how jurors know each other, and at least more than two, I guess, know each other out of this group. I think maybe 49 are in the courtroom right now.
Yeah, so that's something that they're going to have to try to ferret through when they go through this whole process. Not a surprise necessarily. When you try to seat a jury in a smaller community, it's more bound to happen than it is in a place like Chicago, but still, talk about an unlucky draw, if you can call it that. I mean, that's just a strange coincidence. I can't say I've ever seen that before. And
then if that's the case, how many are going to know the defendant? How many are going to know this case? If it's such a small place, I would imagine this case is very unusual. And so I would imagine that it's been saturated with press there.
Yeah, I just read another update from the courtroom that said that there are a lot of people in the gallery supporting the defendant and talking with him during the breaks. So is this a situation where this prosecution may be considered unpopular in the local community? Are people there buying the defendant's versions of things, that this was somehow an accident?
Yeah, well, obviously they are. If he's got supporters now, we don't know if it's family, if it's extended family who's supporting him.
But even then, it would be family of both the victim and the defendant. He's accused of killing his wife.
Right. I'm curious to how the children feel about this, because they have grown children. At least from what I saw, I've just been doing a little Facebook stalking and went into their accounts to take a look at this case. I'd be interested to see what side of the courtroom the kids land on. But, here's the thing. We've been reading a lot about this case and reading the criminal complaint. And the evidence really is pointing to this wasn't an accident like he's claiming. So I wonder how much the supporters of him actually know about the case, about the facts of the case, and if there will be some surprises for them when this case comes to trial.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how this is going to shake out, because you've got 2 911 calls from the defendant. His version of things is that a pipe somehow bounced off of a truck, went through the windshield, ultimately injuring his wife. She died, I think the next day it was, at a hospital. And yet there's been this reconstruction video that you and I were watching earlier off in the wings, where apparently it looks like prosecutors were throwing pipes out of vehicles to see if it was even remotely possible for one of the pipes to bounce in such a way that would allow it to pop up and wind up going through a windshield. And they're saying that this pipe is, 53 inches long? It's not like it's this massive pipe either.
Yeah,
it's not like it's a pipe that's 10 feet long that might come off the back of a truck and then sort of go end over end the way a pole jumper would hit a pipe into the ground and then bounce up the other way. It's not that kind of a pipe. I guess, is it in theory possible that if you take an infinite number of pipes and throw them off of an infinite number of trucks, that it could have happened Well, probably, but how probable is it? If we're to believe that reconstruction video, it's not very probable. And then when investigators started drilling into this particular defendant's story, they weren't able to put the pieces together. Like, where's the truck? Where's the damage in the pavement to indicate that the pipe left a mark when it fell off the truck? These pieces may not have been thought through very clearly in his version of the story.
Well, yeah. Here's the thing: they have surveillance in the area. They have like security camera footage. They can see his car going along the road where he says he is, and they never do see, when they review all of that footage, they don't see a truck with pipes on it. So there's that. Secondly, okay, let's say a pipe fell off, and let's say the freak accident happened and it went through the windshield. And he claims, we think, that it stuck into her throat and he had to pull it out. That because what we can read from the criminal complaint sounds like maybe that's it. And it turns out she does have neck damage, but the medical examiner says that's due to strangulation. So that's very interesting. But another thing against him is he said he pulled her out when he finally got the car stopped. He pulled her out and started doing CPR. Well, there was no glass shards anywhere on her or near her, and the glass shards were still sitting on the passenger seat like they should be, as if a body wasn't there when the windshield was broken. So there, there's a lot against him on this. Also, the pipe comes through. You assume it's coming straight onto her, and she's got skull fractures on the back of her head. She has lacerations on the back of her head and lacerations on the front of her head. So how does that happen in a one-time shot of a pipe coming through the windshield? Prosecutors say he beat her to death with a pipe. That's what their theory is.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see exactly what the defense theory of this is. Are they going to turn around and say that when he got her out of the vehicle, that's when the injury happened to the back of the head? But I mean, talk about not handling a patient with very much care, depending on the severity of it, though. But I wonder, is this a case where the injury is more minor than the prosecutor is leading us to believe that it is? I'm really going to have to listen closely to some of this testimony.
Well, yeah, this case is fascinating because it's almost like what TV movies are made out of, right? From the prosecution side, the guy kills his wife, he beats her to death, and then he stages this elaborate, very strange car crash. Like, who thinks of a pipe and to put that through your windshield? And then he ran the car into a ditch, and it was back in a ditch. What a strange way to kill your wife, even if it was in the heat of the moment that he killed her because they were in a fight or something, so maybe it wasn't premeditated, but they then come up with this elaborate plan to try and cover it up. That's why this case is fascinating, and I think that it'll be a good one for all of us to follow.
I'm very curious about this one. A couple of other little nuggets of information that we were digging up earlier. One is, isn't the wife supposed to have been working within a matter of moments of when this happened?
Right. So she works at the lunch part of a school, and she gets there. She starts her shift at 8 o'clock. Well, this all happened like at 7:50, 7:55 a.m., and they were on where they can ping their cell phones. They're on their way opposite of where school is. And she wasn't calling in to work. The other thing is, her mother says that that the daughter, Barb, the victim in this case, calls her every morning before she goes to work, and she didn't get a call that day. So why did that? Why is there no call? Even if the husband's story to be believed, which he says, she went with him and he was going to go replace windshield in a guy's truck because it's what he does for a living. Which, by the way,
that's the
there's
other
the
bizarre piece
windshield
of this.
connection.
So he's claiming that there's this windshield damage, that this thing went through the windshield. But that's what he does for a living, is repair windshields. Now, who better to know exactly the way safety glass works, breaks, how much force is necessary to penetrate it, than a guy who works with windshields?
Well, exactly, because I'm not. Who's going to think of that? If you're trying to stage a scene, it's such a bizarre thing to stage, unless you know everything to know about car windshields, which apparently he does. His story is they were going to pick up the truck from a guy. The guy was leaving the keys, and he was going to take the truck and go replace the windshield for him, and his wife was with him. But there was no indicator why would she be with him 5 minutes before she's supposed to be at work, which is in a completely opposite direction. She didn't make her morning phone call that she always makes to her mother. And then they find the guy, the truck owner, who says, I never arranged for him to come replace my windshield. So he's got some problems.
Yeah, this will be really interesting. I'm waiting to see how it's going to play out. One thing I mentioned earlier, in case you missed it, the link that it is indeed a small world. At least one of the defense attorneys for this particular defendant is the former law partner to Dean Strang of Making a Murderer fame. So that's another interesting piece of information related to this case. It's not a huge law firm, but it's a well-respected law firm. The office, as I recall it, at least when I was working in Wisconsin, is right across the street from the state capitol, prime location, many very well-respected attorneys there. So I'm curious to see exactly how they're going to handle this case. What's the defense theory going to be?
Right. Well, he's got some good attorneys, and he's got a lot of support in the courtroom. So, they may very well put on a case where this jury doesn't really know what happened that day. I mean, I guess if you take her injuries, what you said about the injuries to the back of her head could have happened after pulling her from the car. There's fingernail scratches on her neck, but then he can say, I was trying to pull the pipe out, and so maybe that's why he says that. Maybe they can explain away the injuries, and this still could be just a freak accident that this guy is now on trial for. A good defense team can do that, and a good defense team can put reasonable doubt in jurors' minds.
Normally we say here that the medical examiner is not the most interesting piece of evidence in a case. In this case, it might be, because we're going to have to really look hard and long at exactly the nature of the injuries. Is something that's being deemed in the stories that we're hearing to be an injury really just a scratch? We're going to have to really look at the medical examiner's testimony here.
And the jurors will see autopsy photos, and they're going to see the injuries that she had to make that determination. Because we know what we're reading in the criminal complaint is the lacerations she had here, and the laceration. Well, what are the, to what extent are those lacerations? Yeah, this case, the more we read about and the more we get into it, the more I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if we're going to get openings today like we have thought the whole day we would, because it's taken them longer to get a jury than they expected. But it is in Central Time Zone, so there's still a possibility we'll see openings.
Yeah, as soon as we get those openings, assuming that we're going to get them today, we will bring them to you live. In the meantime, let's continue reviewing testimony in the Cloud 9 case. We are waiting for closing arguments in that case. They should begin tomorrow morning. This is Ebony Yeomans, one of the additional eyewitnesses.
Spell it for the court reporter, please.
Ebony E-B-O-N-Y.
Court reporter, please.
Ebony E-B-O-N-Y, last name Yeomans, Y-O-U-M-A-N-S.
And Ms. Yeomans, are you currently employed?
Yes, ma'am.
And where are you employed?
At Avante.
What is that?
It's a nursing and rehab.
Okay. How long have you been there?
A few months.
Okay. Do you live in Ocala, Marion County?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you lived here in Marion County?
All my life.
Do you know a person by the name of Danielle Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe your relationship with Danielle.
That's my best friend.
Okay. What do you call her? Does she have a nickname? Dee Dee? Okay. Do you know Nathaniel Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is Nathaniel Kendrick to you?
That's my best friend's brother.
Okay. Did you previously have a dating relationship with him?
Yes, ma'am.
When?
A few years ago.
Okay. Do you know a person by the name of Maisha Barrow?
I have heard of her name, but don't know her personally.
Okay. Have you seen her around town before?
I have.
On multiple occasions?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know a person by the name of Laquan Barrow, or Quan?
Don't know him personally.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
I have.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you please point to him and identify something that he's wearing?
White shirt, blue tie.
Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Laquan Barrow.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Gary King?
I've heard of him.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Black shirt,
Okay. Black shirt. What kind of tie is he wearing?
black and white tie.
Regular tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Gary King.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Michael Eugene Smith?
I've heard of him
Have you seen him before?
once.
Once? The night of the Cloud 9 shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe something he's wearing?
Black shirt, teal tie.
Okay. Bow tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Michael Smith.
The record will so reflect.
Did you go to Cloud9 Club on September 12th, going into the morning of September 13th of 2015?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you before you went to the club?
To my mom's.
Who else was there with you?
A bunch of family, because my nieces had came down.
Okay. And eventually, some of you went to the club that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Who went with you?
Danielle and I believe one of my other nieces.
Okay, so 3 of you went together in one car?
I met Danielle in town.
Okay. Did you arrive together with Dee Dee?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you park?
I can't quite remember.
Okay. Do you know approximately what time you got there?
It was after 11.
Okay. And were you able to get in the club when you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
How crowded was it when you arrived?
Not so crowded.
So you go inside and what do you do?
Just stand around.
Okay. Eventually, does a fight break out inside the club?
Yes, ma'am.
How close were you to this altercation?
Probably like where I'm sitting to where you're standing.
Okay. So would you say 15, 20 feet?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see who was involved in this fight?
Yes, ma'am.
Who?
The girl they called Maisha and LaQuan.
Okay. And who else?
It was a bunch of people around, so.
Okay. Who was Maisha fighting?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was she fighting?
Danielle.
And you said Quan became involved in it as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Did that get broken up?
Eventually,
How?
by security.
What happened with that group that was involved in the fight?
They put them outside.
Did you end up outside as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe to the jury what happened once the group and yourself was outside the club.
It was a security guard was out there, and I was pretty much like, "Can you just make them leave so we can go?" To like suppress the situation so nothing further would happen. And it was just a bunch of commotion going on outside.
Did a fight start up outside the club as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Between who?
Danielle and Maisha.
Okay, so it started up again after they were outside.
Yes, ma'am.
Did LaQuan become involved in that as well?
I can't quite remember.
Did you see Nate at any time inside the club?
Once.
When you saw him inside the club, what was going on?
Nothing, just passed him.
Okay. Did you see him outside the club?
Eventually.
Okay. At the point in time that we were just talking about when Maisha and Danielle started fighting again, he was not outside? Okay. What was LaQuan doing when his sister and Danielle started fighting again outside the club?
He was trying to get closer to the fight,
Did he get close to the fight?
not to get involved.
Did you hear him say anything at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you hear him say?
He said he's gonna wet a bitch.
What does that mean to you?
To me, that means he's gonna shoot somebody.
Okay. And when you say wet, you're saying W-E-T?
Yes,
Wet?
ma'am.
Okay. After he said that, what did he do?
He was just pacing back and forth in the parking lot.
Okay. Where was all this going on in relation to the front door of the club?
Like, right in the front.
Okay.
Like, as soon as you get out of the door.
Do you remember what LaQuan was wearing that night?
Yes, ma'am.
What was he wearing?
He originally had on a black t-shirt with a dark color bottoms, but outside he had on a black tank top.
Same bottoms that you saw him in before?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see Gary King there at the club that night?
I don't remember seeing him inside, but afterwards,
Okay. Where did you first remember seeing him?
as he came to the front door after the shooting.
Okay. So you didn't see him until after the shooting took place.
Yes, ma'am.
What about Michael Smith? Did you see him there that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Inside the club?
I can't recall seeing him inside.
And you saw him, where do you recall him being the first time you saw him that night?
Standing to the right side of the building,
Okay. And do you remember what he was wearing?
a white t-shirt and red basketball shorts. A white tank top.
Does anybody try to break up the fight that's occurring between Maisha and Danielle outside the club at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was trying to do that?
Myself along with some other people that was outside.
Were you successful in breaking the two females up?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened after that?
We was just pretty much trying to get security to just clear the parking lot.
Were you trying to leave?
Yeah.
Were you trying to take Danielle with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was your cousin that you were there with? Was she out there as well?
I can't remember where she was at the time.
After the fight broke up outside, where were you in relation to the front door of the club?
To the edge of the building, towards the right,
Towards the Oyster Bar or the other side?
the other side.
Okay, the parking lot next to Cloud 9?
Yes, ma'am.
On the side. Okay, so you're more towards the side of the building.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What happens next?
Eugene and Quan is standing out in the parking lot, and then him and Danielle is exchanging words.
Who and who are exchanging words?
Quan and Danielle.
Okay. And what do you hear Quan say, if you can understand anything?
He kept saying he was going to catch him a body.
Did you see Nathaniel at this point?
Not at that time.
When do you see Nathaniel outside the club?
It was a few minutes had passed, and then that's when he came behind us.
So are you standing there with Danielle,
Yes, ma'am.
facing the parking lot?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is Quan and Michael Eugene Smith?
Facing the building.
Okay. So you kind of facing each other?
Yes, ma'am.
Where are Laquan and Michael in relation to any cars or anything in the parking lot?
Standing like between the cars that was in the parking lot, more so towards the front of the vehicles.
Okay. And were they standing next to any particular car that you remember?
I can't remember that.
Okay. Was the parking lot packed at this point?
I mean, with cars, but the people were like everywhere.
Okay. I mean with cars, I'm sorry. Was it full with cars?
Yes, ma'am.
Was there also a vehicle parked kind of on the sidewalk in the front?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of vehicle was that?
All I remember was a dark colored vehicle. I never knew what type of vehicle it was.
Did you see Laquan Barrow with a firearm that night?
Yes, ma'am.
When's the first time you saw him with a gun?
When he got it from Eugene after they passed each other.
Okay. Where did they pass each other?
Like, not in a parking area, but in like the open spot before you actually get to the parking between the building, and they have parking spots. So before the parking spots start, they were right there.
So you saw Michael Eugene Smith hand Laquan Barrow a gun. What happens after that?
They were just standing out there, just walking back and forth.
Okay. Is this after you and Danielle and Laquan and Michael are facing each other and words are being exchanged?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So they're walking back and forth. What happens next?
And then eventually that's when Nathaniel came outside,
Okay. Once Nathaniel comes outside, what happens?
and he said, "What's up, nigga?"
Nathaniel said that?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell who he was directing that to?
From my understanding, he was saying it to Laquan.
Okay. Did Laquan respond back to that?
I can't remember. He probably was just out there, just moving around.
Okay. Where was Nathaniel at this point in time when he came outside in relation to you and Dee Dee?
Well, standing more so beside me, and Danielle was back here
Okay. Kind of back
a little bit.
behind the two of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are Laquan and Michael still facing, directed their bodies towards the front of the club?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What happens next?
And then Nathaniel told him, if you're going to shoot, nigga, shoot.
Okay. Nathaniel says that to Laquan.
Yes, ma'am.
What happens?
And they were just arguing back and forth, and then eventually shots started.
Okay. Did you see who was shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you see shoot?
I first seen the one that Laquan had, then when Michael leveled off and started shooting.
Okay. So you saw both Laquan Barrow and Michael Eugene Smith shoot in which direction?
Towards the club way.
Okay. Who was standing there?
Like towards it, like beside the club.
Yeah.
It was other people that I can see behind me, and then me, Nathaniel, and then Danielle was that way.
So would you say that the three of you were closest to the two of them?
Yes, ma'am.
Once the two of them started shooting, what did you do?
We ducked and then ran in front of the building, inside the door.
Okay. And what did you see about Nate at that point in time after the shooting started?
Well, seeing him run, then fall inside the door.
Okay. And where were you when you saw him fall?
We was in the door together.
Okay. You and Nathaniel were in the door together?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was Danielle?
She had fell. I thought she had just tripped.
Was that in the front of the club?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened after she fell in front of the club?
Then I turned to look at her, and another girl was pulling her inside of the door.
Okay. Where did you get to?
Like, in the door, like right in the door.
Did you go in the club?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do once you got inside the club?
I was just sitting there, like, shocked.
Did you call 911?
I tried.
Were you successful?
Not the first time.
Eventually, were you?
Yes, ma'am.
We continue to review previous testimony in the Cloud 9 trial out of Florida. That case is expected to go to the jury tomorrow. Cathy Russon, our senior trial producer, remains in the Eastern time zone for the time being, here in studio, shockingly, surprisingly. So Cloud 9 is going to go into closing arguments tomorrow. And it's anybody's guess as to what the jury's going to think. I think that the state's got enough there for convictions.
I do too. You know, there are some out there that are saying that they don't think. They think that the defense did a good job of putting some reasonable doubt. But if I was on this jury, I could definitely convict them. I think there were plenty of eyewitnesses that put a gun in each one of the three hands that night. And the only ones that really didn't put a gun are their buddies that came in and testified for them today.
Yeah, exactly. And I was saying before, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, that defense case may have done more harm than good.
Well, it just wasn't, for me, it wasn't credible. I mean, you bring your cousin in to say that he was with you that night, and he never saw a gun. And the one guy said Laquan had his hands up when the shooting started. That's how I knew he didn't have a gun in his hand. And you're just like, it's like, oh, they were giving too much detail that didn't make any sense, because then we have all these other witnesses that came in that weren't related to the defendants in different shapes and forms, who, you know, clearly put guns in their hands.
Yeah, I mean, so the prosecutor's probably going to take this and could go at it one of a couple of ways and just say, you know, members of the jury, you can discount the testimony of the friends, the buddies, or the prosecutor could hit it even harder and just say flat out the friends are all lying to cover up for their buddies and their relatives and whatnot. I'm curious to see part of the argument, but it could be a soft hammer or a harsh hammer as to what the defense was trying to do there. But bottom line, this is going to be a lengthy closing argument, possibly, because the state gets a crack, then defense attorney number one, then defense attorney number two, then defense attorney number three, and then the state gets a rebuttal. The openings from the defense, though, were extremely short, so it's anyone's guess how long these closings are going to go as well.
And their cases were short. So, you know, they only put on 1 and 2 witnesses, each of the 3 defenses. Actually, the Smith didn't put on any, although the attorney for Smith did say beforehand that most of the witnesses they were going to call were already called by Barrow, and that's why they put on no witnesses. So I don't know what the closing arguments are going to look like, quite frankly. We're going to see 5 closing arguments tomorrow, and that will take the greater portion of the day, obviously. But I guess the only thing that all 3 of them are going to say, we thought all along that maybe they would point fingers at each other, but that really hasn't been how the defense has gone. It's been just basically, did you see my client do anything? Or are you sure you saw my client do something? Or were you really standing in that area where you said you were when you say you saw my client? So they haven't really pointed fingers necessarily at each other. And so I don't know how closing arguments will go. It'll be interesting.
Well, it's more likely than not that that'll be argued rather than stated, because saying that someone else did it is more of an argument than actual testimony. I'm sure that Smith and King will have their attorneys get up there and say, well, Barrow clearly was the ringleader of the shooting, hold him accountable. The witnesses who pointed the finger at my client either changed their story or were unsure of themselves, and therefore the state hasn't proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. My supposition is that might be where they go, because again, the key to closing argument is you're getting nuggets of information on the record in evidence, and then you take those and run with them in the argument and just say, well, okay, let's take these facts that we were able to line up on the record and then make sense of them, argue with them. And that could be a possible strategy for Smith and King. Barrow, I think, is a lost cause. I don't see any jury not convicting him, because almost everybody is pointing the finger at him as a primary shooter.
Look, I think for sure him. And yeah, you're right. Almost every prosecution witness put the gun in Barrow's hand, and he's the catalyst for why this happened. His sister and the other victim were fighting, and he jumped in there. Now, every witness has said that. Even his buddy today said that he was holding him back, giving him a bear hug and holding him back. So everybody pretty much puts Barrow as being the instigator of all of this. So I don't see how he gets away with this at all. And actually Smith too. And I'm going to tell you that I think Smith's antics in the courtroom are going to come back on him. All of his smirking and snickering and smiling, he faces the jury, where the other 2 defendants don't necessarily.
That's true.
So come on. That didn't help him for sure. And then Minnie put a gun in his hand. So King is the only one where we saw the least amount of witnesses. Where a lot of people said they didn't see him at all that night. But there were 2, 3. Did we end up with 3? There were at least 2 that put a gun in King's hand. The jury might just call it good, come back with all guilty, and be on their way.
To me, it goes back to there being 3 different weapons, and therefore
Yes.
a presumption of 3 different shooters. The forensics indicated 13 bullets came from one gun, and I've been saying this all afternoon. 4 came from another gun, 4 came from yet a third gun. So the jury is going to look and say, well, the forensics is the disinterested evidence, and we got to line up 3 different people who pulled the trigger, and there they sit. There's stronger evidence against some than others, but well, of course the witnesses saw one primary shooter, because the forensics indicate there's one primary shooter. One person fired 13 of the bullets.
But this is interesting, because all along I assumed that was Barrow that was the primary shooter with all the bullets. But we had at least one witness that testified that Smith unloaded his gun and just kept shooting and shooting and shooting until he couldn't shoot anymore. So it's interesting to me that it might be Smith that was the one that shot the most out of all of them. In the end, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter who did.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how the closings go in this case. We are also following a couple of other trials. The Kendhammer case out of Wisconsin, we thought opening statements were going to be today. Jury selection hit a snag, and it looks like they're going to get pushed off until tomorrow. Why is that?
Well, it's taking longer. One, they didn't, I don't know what they anticipated, but they really did think they were going to do openings, and now it's taking longer. There are jurors that know each other. It's just, the process is taking longer. Now, the judge is still confident they will get a jury today, but he will then just instruct them and send them home, and they'll have openings in the morning, which means we're going to have tomorrow closing arguments in 1 and opening statements in 2 trials.
So we've got the third case we're following. That's the Xavie and Dobson case out of Tennessee. That's the young football player who apparently, under the prosecution's theory, was shot and killed in a mistaken retaliatory gang attack, meaning there were some other gang-related shootings in the area at the time. The state's theory is that members of a gang thought that these people hanging out on a back porch were part of a previous shooting and opened fire on a group of 8 or 9 people on a back porch, and that person who was struck and killed was an unintended target. That it turned out nobody on the back porch was a member of a gang, and that the gang members got it all wrong and opened fire on the wrong people in retaliation for an earlier murder.
Right, yeah. Gang members getting it wrong. I mean, that cost, first of all, they're going around shooting people, but secondly, look, this kid was just at his friend's house on the porch doing what teenagers do. He was there hanging out. Nobody was attached to a gang. And this Xavie was an excellent football player. He was a star at his high school. His coaches say he had no doubt that he would have been recruited into college. And senseless. And he died because the bullet started and he threw himself in front of 2 of the girls that were there. He saved those girls' lives. He's been stated that he's a hero. President Obama picked up this case when he was president and tweeted about it, and he also spoke about it, about the gang violence and the innocence of this boy dying. And then he was even given the Arthur Ashe Courage Award at the ESPY Awards for his act, which, was heroic. There were 4 shooters apparently, and then they go on later to do some more drive-bys, and one of them gets killed. So
one of the possible suspects in the shooting of this 15-year-old sophomore, Xavie and Dobson, winds up getting murdered later that night. So it leaves police with 3 suspects. And this is another one where we've really got to get into the details of it, because Christopher Bassett Jr., one of the suspects, basically confessed to police, points the finger at one of the other suspects, Kipling Colbert. And Colbert also apparently matched a description of somebody at the scene, confessed to a friend, and there's some text message evidence. I'm waiting to see how deep and complete it is. So you've got one defendant pointing the finger at another defendant. I'm still waiting to see all the evidence that they have against the 3rd defendant, Richard Williams III, because we don't know a lot about what they have against him.
Yeah, right. And the one that allegedly confessed, his defense attorney has tried very hard to get that thrown out, saying that he gave those statements before being Mirandized, but the judge is not throwing that confession out to our knowledge.
I would need to hear more details to see exactly whether that stands, because you can confess as long as it's not in a what we call a custodial interrogation, and it's in. So if that confession happened before the point of a custodial interrogation, it wouldn't matter that he wasn't read Miranda. That stuff is really fact specific. So Cathy Russon, you'll be here in New York City through the week, so I'm sure we'll have you on set nonstop for the next 4 days.
It was great to be here. It was great to finally be here in person.
Finally be here. So we're going to wrap up the broadcast today from now here on the Law and Crime Network with a reminder, as I always give everyone at this hour, that we are live from at least 9 a.m. until at least 5 p.m. with gavel-to-gavel coverage of trials. We have 3 big cases in critical junctures tomorrow, so be sure to join us tomorrow. For now, this is Aaron Keller, and for all of us at Law and Crime, have a good evening.